The cold wind rolled across the open range like a living thing, pushing against Elena with every step she took. She pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it did almost nothing to stop the icy air from biting into her skin. She had been traveling with a wagon group, following a trail west in hopes of finding a better life with her cousins. But everything had gone wrong when the weather changed too quickly. That morning, the sky had been clear and blue. By noon, dark clouds had swept in. By afternoon, the world had turned white. Her horse had panicked in the sudden storm, spooked by the sharp wind and the rattling sound of cold rain turning into sleet. It reared, almost throwing her off, then bolted into the distance before she could grab the reins again. She screamed for help, but the wind swallowed her voice. The wagons were too far behind, the storm too loud, and soon the world around her became a spinning blur of snow, wind, and fear. She had tried to follow the tracks back, but the storm had covered them within minutes. Now she was alone on the open range, and the cold felt as if it were sinking into her bones. She tried to walk in a straight line, but her legs were stiff, and her feet felt numb inside her boots. Her breath came out in shaky clouds. Each time she blinked, her eyelashes stuck together from the frost forming on them. She knew enough about the cold to understand that this kind of weather could be deadly. She felt scared, but she tried to keep moving because every story she had ever heard said that stopping meant danger. As the wind howled, she wondered if she would ever see her cousins again. She imagined their faces, the warm fire they had promised to build each night, and the hope she had carried with her when she first started this journey. Now, that hope felt small and far away. Miles from her, Dawson rode his horse with his collar pulled high around his neck. He had just finished delivering cattle for a rancher several towns back, and he planned to return to his own small cabin before nightfall. Dawson was a quiet cowboy, someone who spent most of his time working alone under the open sky. He liked the silence of the land and the simple rhythm of ranch work. But even he knew the storm blowing in was worse than usual. The wind hit his face like shards of ice, and he leaned forward slightly, urging his horse to move faster. He noticed the first sign of trouble when he saw hoofprints in the snow that didn't look steady. They zigzagged as if the rider had lost control. He slowed down, his sharp eyes studying the ground. A few yards ahead, a small piece of fabric fluttered against a frozen bush. He recognized it instantly as part of a woman's shawl. That alone was unusual. Few women traveled alone on the open range. He felt a pull inside him, the familiar instinct to help anyone in danger, so he followed the tracks. The further he rode, the more signs he saw. Snow disturbed in odd patterns, footprints that dragged instead of landed firmly, even the prints of a horse that looked like it had run off without a rider. The storm thickened around him, making it harder to see, but he pressed on. Then, through the swirling snow, he saw a shadow moving slowly, almost collapsing with each step. He rode closer and finally saw Elena. She was shaking, struggling to stay upright, her face pale and her fingers stiff. Dawson jumped off his horse immediately. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice firm but gentle. She tried to answer, but her lips trembled too much to speak. Her knees buckled, and Dawson caught her before she fell into the snow. He could feel just how cold she was, and that worried him more than anything. A person could survive hunger, could survive getting lost, but the cold, especially this kind of cold, could take a life quickly. "You're freezing," he said quietly. "We need to get you warm." He lifted her onto his horse, wrapping his thick coat around her shoulders. She felt the warmth of the coat immediately, but her body kept shaking, unable to stop. Dawson climbed up behind her, steadying her as he guided the horse forward toward a place he knew. An old, abandoned line cabin used years ago by ranch hands. It wasn't in the best condition, but it had 4 walls, a roof, and a fireplace. That was enough. The journey to the cabin felt long, but Dawson kept his arm around her to stop her from slipping. Elena leaned back weakly, unable to control her shivering. She didn't know who he was, but she felt her fear ease slightly, because someone was finally helping her. When they reached the small cabin, Dawson helped her down gently. She tried to stand on her own but stumbled again, so he supported her, guiding her inside. The cabin was dim, cold, and dusty, but at least it was shelter. He settled her on a blanket near the fireplace while he quickly looked for firewood. Most of the wood outside was covered in snow, but Dawson managed to find some pieces that were dry enough. He brought them inside, stacked them in the fireplace, and struck a match. After a few tries, a weak flame appeared, then grew little by little until it provided a small glow. Elena watched him work, her teeth chattering loudly. She felt embarrassed for making so much noise, but she couldn't stop. Dawson checked her fingers and the tips of her ears, making sure she wasn't frostbitten. Her skin was icy, cold, and he frowned with worry. "You need to stay close to the fire," he told her. She nodded, but the shaking only grew worse. Even with the fire starting, it wasn't enough to warm her fast enough. He could see her slipping toward the dangerous edge of cold exhaustion, the kind that made people fall asleep without waking again. Dawson moved to her side. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice low and steady. "Stay close, or you'll freeze." She looked up at him, embarrassed but frightened. She didn't want to be a burden, but she also knew the truth. Her body felt like it was losing the fight against the cold. He took his heavy blanket from his saddlebag and wrapped it around both of them. He didn't hesitate, and he didn't make her feel uncomfortable. He simply acted like someone whose only goal was to save a life. Elena felt the warmth of his body beside her, a warmth stronger than the fire. For the first time since she was lost, Elena felt a small sense of safety. She leaned closer, not out of boldness, but because the cold pushed her toward him. Dawson stayed awake, feeding the fire, adjusting the blanket, and making sure she didn't slip into dangerous sleep. After a long time, she finally whispered her name. "Elena." "Dawson," he replied quietly. She felt comfort in that single word, knowing the name of the man who had saved her. The storm howled outside, but inside the cabin, surrounded by shared warmth, she felt a little hope return. Dawson didn't talk much, but everything he did showed he cared about making sure she survived the night. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, breathing a bit easier, trusting that she might live through the storm because of this cowboy who appeared at the last moment, just when she needed someone the most. The wind continued to rage outside, but inside the little cabin, their small fire and shared warmth fought back against the freezing night, beginning a quiet connection that neither of them expected when the storm first began. Morning arrived slowly, almost unwillingly. The storm still pushed against the cabin walls, making the wood creak softly. Elena woke to the faint warmth of the dying fire and the steady presence of Dawson beside her. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she felt the blanket around them and heard the wind outside, and everything came back. Her body was still cold, but the dangerous shaking from the night was gone. Dawson noticed her eyes open and gave a small nod. He had hardly slept. He kept the fire alive through the night and made sure she never drifted into the kind of sleep that came from freezing. The kind that people didn't wake from. He looked tired, but steady, as if taking care of her had been the most natural thing in the world. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Weak," she whispered honestly, "but better." "That's good." His voice was low, calm, the kind that made a person feel safe. "Storm's not letting up yet. We're stuck here for a while." Elena tried to sit up, but her legs trembled. Dawson helped her gently, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. The small cabin felt cold again now that the fire had burned down. Dawson stood and added more wood, blowing softly until the flame grew stronger. The warm light filled the room again, and Elena watched him quietly. He moved with practiced hands, as if he had done this 100 times before. She wondered how often he had been alone in storms like this, how many nights he had fought the cold by himself. "Thank you," she said suddenly, her voice still soft but full of emotion. He looked over his shoulder and nodded. Anyone out here would have done the same. Elena wasn't sure she believed that. She knew many people were kind, yes, but she also knew many would have passed by without noticing the signs he had followed. Dawson didn't just help. He had searched for her. That truth warmed her more than the fire. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the previous morning. Dawson heard it and opened his saddlebag, taking out a small piece of dried meat and a bit of hard bread. "It's not much," he said, "but it'll help." Elena accepted it gratefully. Dawson didn't eat until she had. That small gesture made her chest tighten with gratitude. Outside, the storm continued to roar, snow blowing hard against the walls. Dawson watched it for a moment, studying the sky through the small window. "It'll calm down by afternoon," he predicted. "But the trail, back to your wagon group, might be covered." Elena felt a little fear rise inside her. "Do you think they're safe?" "Most likely," Dawson said. "A wagon group has more shelter than a lone traveler. They would have set up a strong camp before the storm hit." She nodded, trying to believe it. Hours passed slowly. The cabin warmed enough for Elena to stop feeling the sting of the cold in her fingers. She and Dawson talked in quiet voices, sharing simple things about their lives. She told him about her cousins waiting for her, about her hope to start fresh in a new place. He told her about his work, traveling from ranch to ranch, never staying in one place too long. As they talked, she learned he wasn't a man of many words, but each word he chose was honest and careful. He listened more than he spoke, and he never once made her feel foolish or weak for getting lost in the storm. In the afternoon, the storm finally began to weaken. The sky slowly brightened, and the wind softened. Dawson checked outside again and returned with quieter footsteps. "We can try to move," he said. "Won't be easy. Snow's deep." Elena tried to stand, but her legs wobbled. She steadied herself with Dawson's help. Walking felt strange after a night of cold and stillness, but she was determined. Dawson wrapped her in his coat again and helped her climb onto his horse. She held onto the saddle horn tightly while Dawson mounted behind her. His presence at her back gave her strength. She felt safer than she had felt in many days. The open range looked different now. Everything was white and silent. The snow was deep enough that each step the horse took was slow and heavy. Dawson kept one arm around Elena, so she wouldn't slide off. For hours they moved across the frozen land. Elena leaned back against him, her body still tired from the cold. She watched the quiet world around them and wondered how she would ever repay him for saving her life. As they moved forward, distant sounds echoed across the range. Voices, horses, the faint clang of metal pots. Elena's heart leaped. "My group," she whispered. Dawson guided the horse toward the sound. Soon, they saw the wagons gathered in a circle, smoke rising from fires, people moving about anxiously. When the group noticed the approaching horse, they rushed toward them. "Elena!" her cousin Clara cried, tears falling before she even reached her. Arms reached up to help Elena down, surrounding her with warmth and relief. Dawson stayed seated for a moment, watching silently as Elena's family embraced her. Everyone wanted to know what happened, how she survived, who helped her. Elena held their hands tightly before turning back to Dawson. "This man saved my life," she said firmly, her voice full of emotion. "I wouldn't be here without him." Dawson shook his head slightly, embarrassed by the attention. "Just did what anyone should," he said quietly. The group thanked him again and again, offering food, blankets, and a warm place to rest. Dawson accepted their kindness, but stayed slightly apart, as if not wanting to intrude too much. Elena noticed. Even in a crowd, he looked like someone who spent most of his days alone. As evening approached, Dawson prepared to leave. He tightened his saddle and mounted his horse while the others packed up camp. Elena hurried to him before he could ride away. "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice softer than the evening wind. "Storm's done," he replied. "Your people are here. I've got to get home before night." Elena looked at him, feeling a sudden heaviness in her heart. She didn't want him to disappear into the open range like a passing shadow. She took a step closer. "I want to see you again," she said quietly. Dawson hesitated for the first time. The strong, steady cowboy who had faced the storm without fear now looked uncertain. Then he touched the brim of his hat, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Take care, Elena." She watched him turn his horse toward the fading horizon. He rode away slowly, becoming smaller and smaller against the snowy land. Her cousins gathered around her, guiding her back toward the camp. But Elena looked over her shoulder until Dawson finally disappeared from sight. She didn't know when their paths would cross again, but deep inside, she felt something sure what happened in that cabin during the storm connected them in a way she would never forget. And Dawson, though he didn't say it, carried the same quiet memory with him as he rode on the memory of a stranger he saved in a storm, and the warmth of the woman who trusted him when the world outside tried to freeze them both.